On September 19, 1944, dense fog blanketed the countryside around Areor, France. First Lieutenant Merwin Men from the 37th Tank Battalion clutched the edge of his Sherman tank's turret while his gunner scanned the hazy landscape through the periscope. Intelligence had alerted them to the presence of Panthers, those imposing German tanks with angled plating that resisted most U.S. projectiles effectively. Neither Men nor his team realized that among their stored shells were 6 special ones destined to shift the dynamics of tank combat dramatically. These 6 M93 high-velocity armor-piercing projectiles, each featuring a tungsten carbide penetrator, effectively turned their standard Sherman into a surprise adversary that German crews would soon dread. Beyond their physical punch, these rounds delivered a mental blow, dismantling enemy confidence in the Panthers' supposed invincibility and prompting a total re-evaluation of how they stacked up against American armor. The tale of this unique ammo-reshaping armored battles starts far from French fields, back in American labs and factories, where experts in metals and ballistics raced the clock to address a crisis endangering U.S. tank efforts across Europe. Early in 1944, U.S. Army leaders confronted an unforeseen challenge. The M4 Sherman, the core of their armored units, struggled to neutralize German heavies head-on. Germany's Panther, designed as a counter to the Russian T-34, paired a potent 75mm fast-firing cannon with an 80mm front plate angled at 55 degrees, yielding around 140mm of equivalent protection that U.S. guns rarely breached. Spies had lowballed both the numbers and prowess of these Panthers in service. Come June 1944, as Allied troops hit Normandy beaches, fully 38% of German armor there consisted of Panthers, not the sparse few anticipated, but scores of these sophisticated mediums, sometimes handled by green troops yet shielded by plating. No ordinary American cannon could crack from the front. The 75mm M3 cannon equipping most Shermans during Normandy proved useless against a Panther's forward armor regardless of distance. Shots just ricocheted off the inclined surface, exposing the U.S. tank to devastating counterattacks from the enemy's superior weapon, lethal beyond 2,000 meters. The upgraded 76mm M1, rolling out to frontline units by July 1944, fared better but still faltered versus Panther plating. With conventional M62 capped penetrators, it could pierce 109mm at 1,000 meters on flat angles, enough for Panzerfuß and various German self-propelled guns, yet the slanted Panther front stayed largely proof against it. The 76mm might tag the Panther's turret housing, but only perilously near, usually below 100 meters, where the German superior range turned any duel into a death trap. The core issue lay not with the barrel, but the shells it launched. Rolling out the 76mm upgrade itself involved layers of red tape and delayed awareness. Initial M4A1 Shermans fitted with the 76mm M1 emerged from assembly lines in January 1944. These M4A1 76 models reached Britain on April 10, 1944, supplying 130 vehicles to gear up for Normandy. Still, despite readiness, U.S. officers held back these enhanced tanks for D-Day. Factors abounded: insufficient familiarization for operators with the novel setup, supply headaches from juggling dual ammo stocks. Above all, faith that the 75mm would handle foreseen threats. Reality delivered a harsh lesson. By July's start, dispatches from Normandy revealed dire straits. On July 2nd, gripes over the 75mm's impotence against Axis steel hit General Dwight Eisenhower's desk. Accounts from the era capture his dismay in his words. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out? Why, I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war." Eyewitnesses noted he vented further, furious that ordnance brass had guaranteed the 76mm could handle whatever the Germans threw. A panel assembled on July 12, 1944, formally confirmed the tanker's hard-won truth. Routine U.S. armaments couldn't best Panthers directly. General Omar Bradley swiftly mandated shipping 76mm Shermans from the UK to the lines. During Operation Cobra on July 25, 1944, 102 such M4A16 tanks entered the fray for the first time. Early action summaries tempered expectations. Though a step up from the 75mm, the 76mm continued to battle Panther front armor at typical fighting distances. Operators of the Sherman tanks soon realized they had to position themselves for side-angle strikes or aim at the Panther's gun shield from short distances. Yet both approaches were far from ideal against a foe capable of eliminating them at distances exceeding 2,000 meters. The answer emerged from advances in materials, science, and ballistics principles. Come July 1944, engineers at American Ordnance had created the T-4 projectile, which was eventually formalized as the M93 HVAP. This high-velocity armor-piercing type marked a major shift away from traditional armor-piercing configurations. Its makeup featured a tungsten carbide penetrator, the toughest substance then obtainable, encased in a light aluminum sheath along with an aerodynamic cap. Such construction focused the round's kinetic force into a compact, heavy-hitting tip, all while lightening the total mass. The outcome proved striking. The M93 attained a barrel exit speed of 136 mph, far surpassing the 7992 mph of the usual M62 variant. That boost of 244 mph directly enhanced its ability to breach armor. From 1,000 yards, or roughly 914 meters, the HVAP could pierce 160 meters of plating at a 10-degree slant. Per official War Department evaluations, it effectively defeated the Panther's gun mantlet, constructed from curved 100mm cast steel in initial AUSF. D and A models, later upgraded to 120 in the ISF. G. Consequently, Shermans could now reliably hit this spot from up to 1,000 meters, rather than needing to close in perilously near. What was once a risky option turned into a practical choice for tank teams, sparing them from risky side maneuvers or withdrawal. Still, crafting the HVAP addressed just part of the challenge. Manufacturing posed equally daunting hurdles. The T-4 relied on tungsten carbide, a vital resource mostly sourced from China, which supplied 36% of the world's tungsten pre-war. This element was essential across many wartime sectors, including machine tools, various armor-piercing calibers, plate toughening, and other manufacturing uses, all vying for scarce stocks. Just for HVAP shells, U.S. needs alone gobbled up hundreds of tons yearly. Every 76mm HVAP cartridge held about 0.88 kg of tungsten carbide, so a Sherman loaded with 6 such rounds demanded almost 5 kg of the precious stuff. In 1944, China output hovered around 10,000 metric tons of tungsten ore, yet this covered demands from all allies for every purpose. The U.S. bolstered imports with homegrown output from modest mines in Colorado, Nevada, and California, though overall supplies stayed tight. Germany's access to tungsten was infinitely grimmer as Swedish shipments dropped off amid the Axis setbacks, and local yields remained negligible. By 1945, Reich facilities were scrambling to stockpile it for aircraft engine tooling, leaving Panther operators stuck with basic rounds. The U.S. Ordnance Bureau had trialed HVAP designs as early as spring 1942. But large-scale output didn't kick off until post-Normandy reports highlighted the Panther threat's severity. July 1944 brought 1,000 units of 3-inch HVAP for tank destroyers. August delivered 1,000 of the 76mm version. September produced yet another 1,000 rounds of 76mm. Only in November 1944 did 76mm output climb to 5,000 monthly, rising to 7,000 by January 1945. Through March 1945, around 33,000 centimeter HVAP shells had rolled off lines, a notable manufacturing push, yet barely scratching the surface of requirements. As of February 1945, the typical 76mm-equipped Sherman in Europe carried just 5 HVAP rounds, merely 5 to confront adversaries rolling out Panthers as core vehicles in panzer divisions. A full Sherman platoon of 17 vehicles might share 85 HVAP shells altogether, pitted against German forces potentially mustering 30-plus Panthers. Initial HVAP deliveries hit the European front in August 1944, though their debut got lost amid wider operational woes. The bocage terrain in Normandy confined U.S. armor to tight engagements where German heavy guns could surprise advancing Sherman formations. Tankers battled opponents versed in hull-down tactics, showing just the fortified turret while concealing the weaker body. Axis strategies prioritized ambush potential, with Panthers lurking in set spots to let Shermans draw near before unleashing volleys from standoff ranges beyond effective U.S. counterfire. The mental toll on American crews ran deep. They dubbed the Sherman the Ronson after the cigarette lighter, joking it ignited on first hit. Though later studies deemed this image overstated, it nonetheless influenced actions. Spotting a Panther, commanders frequently opted for bombardments from guns or planes over direct clashes, handing the advantage to a rival beatable via proper shells and maneuvers. The introduction of HVAP. The advent of tungsten core projectiles started shifting this equation, though progress was gradual due to limited supplies and insufficient instruction on their strengths and weaknesses. The initial major battlefield trial of HVAP shells didn't occur amid Normandy's bocage, but across the expansive fields of Lorraine, where U.S. armored units had surged into landscapes that played to German strongpoints. By September 1944, Lieutenant General George S. Patton's Third Army was pushing far into France, heading for the German frontier while supply lines strained under extreme pressure. The 4th Armored Division, among the top-performing American tank outfits, had pressed on boldly, capturing a bridgehead over the Moselle River close to Aricourt. Berlin's leadership spotted the danger. Should Patton's forces hit the Rhine and breach into the heartland, the Nazi war machine's factories would lie vulnerable. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army got the directive to strike back, wipe out the U.S. foothold, and halt Patton's momentum. For this push, the Germans gathered 2 fresh panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, mostly outfitted with Panther tanks straight off assembly lines. On the surface, the odds looked lopsided in their favor. Combined, the brigades mustered about 150 armored vehicles versus Combat Command A's, around 50 Shermans in the 4th Armored Division. Just the 113th Panzer Brigade rolled into action with roughly 90 tanks and self-propelled guns across its 2 battalions, featuring 42 Panthers and 40 Panzerfus. Planners in Germany expected a swift triumph, figuring the Panthers' edge in firepower would offset any U.S. edges in supply chains or aerial cover. They couldn't have been more wrong. The clash at Aricourt, spanning 11 days from September 18 to 29, marked the biggest tank battle involving American troops before the Ardennes offensive. Even more crucially, it proved that well-drilled and supplied U.S. tankers could best Germany's advanced panzers via smart maneuvers, integrated infantry and armor teamwork, and smart deployment of high-velocity anti-tank rounds. On the morning of September 19th, dense mist covered the undulating countryside near Aricourt, curtailing German scouting efforts. Without solid recon teams, the Panzer brigades charged ahead, sight unseen, into areas controlled by Americans, familiar with the lay of the land and dug in for defense. Around 8 a.m., parts of the 113th Panzer Brigade broke through U.S. pickets to the east and south of Aricourt. Brand-new Panthers with green crews lumbered on in tight columns, a blunder that seasoned American drivers quickly turned against them. Captain Kenneth R. Lamont's C Company from the 37th Tank Battalion guarded vital routes into Aricourt. His Sherman operators had received guidance on the HVAP shots loaded in their storage, 6 per vehicle. The instructions stressed careful shots at Panther turrets or mantlets, only when distance allowed enough speed for breaching. The same fog that blinded the Germans now aided the defenders. One of Lamont's Sherman pairs sat positioned south of the town as the lead Panther loomed out of the haze, no more than 75 meters off. So close, the Big Cat's vaunted standoff range was irrelevant. The U.S. loader unleashed a shot right away. The Hvap projectile, screaming at over 1 mN, slammed into the Panther's gun shield. Its hard tungsten tip bored through the armored curve and ignited the shells stashed under the cannon, causing a massive blast that heaved the turret upward. 2 additional Panthers burst from the vapor moments later, and both went up in flames almost instantly. Their operators caught flat-footed in the poor sight lines, unable to shoot back. The surviving German vehicles pulled back, their operators stunned by the abrupt demolition of 3 top-tier machines by supposedly outdated Yankee gear. All through that foggy morning of September 19th, comparable skirmishes flared up along the Aricourt front. U.S. tanks, shrouded by the weather, picked off Panthers at optimal distances for HVAP performance. The Germans' formation choices backfired badly. Marching in lines without scouts left their flanks wide open to side shots from American positions. Close to the command center at Aricourt, a squad of M18 Hellcat destroyers, armed with 76mm cannons and HVAP loads, tangled with the enemy at point-blank range. These nimble hunters excelled in the murky up-close fights. By midday, with the mist clearing, spotters for forward guns could sink barrages with the tank guards. P-47. Thunderbolts from the 405th Fighter Group swooped in above, threading through breaks in the overcast to hammer German vehicles with rockets, and the integration of U.S. strengths proved decisive. Although the Panther tank excelled in protective plating and offensive capabilities on its own, U.S. troops routinely applied integrated combat strategies as their core approach. German armored units pushed forward lacking sufficient cannon backing, without aerial protection, and without foot soldiers to neutralize U.S. strongholds. In contrast, American operations seamlessly blended tanks with field guns, aircraft, ground troops, and anti-tank vehicles into a cohesive framework that neutralized German engineering edges. When Panthers ran into these fortified setups, they fell apart bit by bit, even with their advanced features. HVAP rounds didn't render Sherman tanks a match for Panthers in raw specs, yet battles aren't won solely on specs. Tank crews take down vehicles by targeting flaws amid real fighting. The Panther's turret shield, designed to enable the 75mm cannon's vertical and horizontal movement, formed a vulnerable spot. The seam where the turret met the body, the flank plating, the top of the engine. These all became viable aims that HVAP-armed Shermans could now hit effectively at distances once deemed too risky. Even more damaging to German spirits was the mental blow of realizing their tanks weren't impenetrable anymore. Panther operators had been schooled to assume frontal hits from American guns couldn't breach them. Briefings from Intel stressed the Shermans' weak armament. They were assured that facing the enemy head-on kept them secure. The initial Panther leaders who saw Sherman shots pierce their shields and ignite stored shells discovered the hard truth. Those who lived through such clashes brought that insight to their groups, disseminating the fact that U.S. tanks now carried rounds able to overcome Panthers. By the evening of September 19th, German armored leaders were notifying command centers that U.S. Shermans had acquired fresh, stronger munitions. These dispatches were muddled and inconsistent. Certain ones alleged the U.S. had covertly introduced anti-tank units with 90mm weapons. Others speculated the British had loaned 17-pounder Firefly tanks to American squads. The actual situation, that U.S. manufacturing had produced targeted rounds that somewhat offset the Panther's armor superiority, worried German strategists more than any rumor. It showed that American production power could address battlefield issues quicker than German factories could adapt. The clashes persisted until September 22nd, when the primary German pushes ground to a halt. U.S. units had knocked out or crippled about 86 German tanks and self-propelled guns. American casualties included 25 Sherman tanks and 7 anti-tank vehicles. The destruction ratio strongly tilted toward the U.S., in spite of their shortcomings in single-tank design. The Aricourt engagement marked not only a battlefield success, but a turning point in mindset. U.S. tank operators gained confidence that they could take on Panthers without relying on dedicated anti-tank hunters or massive air dominance. German operators forfeited the mental comfort of frontal armor immunity. From the German viewpoint, Aricourt brought bewilderment and harsh self-blame. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which began with roughly 90 tanks and assault guns, could barely field under 20 working machines by September 29th. Post-battle analysis from Germans grappled with justifying the loss. The Panther's design edge was beyond question in theory. How could novice operators in fresh-off-the-line tanks suffer such a total rout? Explanations rested in part on preparation and know-how. Personnel in the Panzer Brigade had scant practice, frequently reaching the line after mere weeks of basics. Tank teams in the U.S. 4th Armored Division were battle-hardened, having battled through France, grasping joint operations, and skilled at assessing landscapes for combat edges. Yet preparation didn't account entirely for Panther casualties, especially breaches that standard U.S. rounds shouldn't have achieved. German intel experts inspecting wrecked Panthers spotted incoming punctures narrower than anticipated, hinting at a smaller caliber shot. Scrutiny of intact projectiles picked up beside crippled tanks uncovered the reality. The U.S. had rolled out tungsten core ammo. This revelation carried deep strategic weight. Germany had invented comparable rounds, the Panther-Killers 40, featuring tungsten penetrators for better punching power. But by late 1944, German tungsten stocks were severely strained, prioritized for machinery over shells. If the U.S. could supply such tungsten core ammo in enough volume to equip forward tank groups, it highlighted production might and material availability that Germany simply couldn't rival. American tanks not only outnumbered their German counterparts and enjoyed superior logistical backing, but they also gained access to rounds that offset some of the meticulously designed German edges in armored shielding. The influence of HVAP shells reached further than the short-term battlefield outcomes at Aracourt. Once news circulated among U.S. armored formations that these innovative rounds could penetrate Panthers in optimal scenarios, crews grew bolder in confronting enemy tanks head-on. The mental freeze that had gripped certain outfits amid the grueling Normandy clashes started to fade. Operators continued to acknowledge the formidable prowess of Panthers, yet they shed their sense of powerlessness. This boost in confidence turned out to be vital for later campaigns. Teams convinced of their fighting potential would press forward assertively, hunting for superior vantage points and embracing measured gambles. Those perceiving themselves as inferior, however, would falter, handing the upper hand to adversaries. Despite its woefully limited stocks, HVAP gave U.S. tank operators a tool to challenge Panthers on nearer even footing. Even squads without direct experience firing HVAP shots drew mental strength from the awareness that such rounds were out there and could potentially arrive at critical moments. Leaders had to grapple with tough choices on distributing the scant HVAP reserves. Anti-tank specialists like tank destroyers, whose core duty centered on armor duels, got priority shares. Versatile Sherman tanks, tasked with both aiding foot soldiers and tackling enemy vehicles, frequently drew shorter allotments even though they bumped into foes more often. Such disparities bred friction between frontline demands and back-end constraints. The distribution process, handled across layers from Army headquarters to battalion levels, bred wastefulness. Certain groups ended up with excess Hvap they couldn't deploy right away, whereas others burned through theirs in mere days and got no replenishment despite desperate pleas. When German troops unleashed their unexpected push through the Ardennes in December 1944, U.S. armored outfits endured fresh waves of fierce strain. In the Battle of the Bulge, scores of Panthers and Tigers rolled out amid wintry terrain that aided defenders and curbed Allied aerial dominance thanks to foul skies. Sherman operators leaned hard on their meager HVAP stocks to tackle German heavies. The deficit turned dire just days into the brutal clashes. A few outfits depleted their HVAP entirely, with refill bids ignored as supply lines buckled under snow-choked paths torn up by enemy thrusts. Still, amid the harsh Ardennes struggle, U.S. troops showed that smart maneuvers and integrated arms tactics could make up for gear shortfalls. Tank teams worked in tight sync with ground forces, deploying bazooka squads to knock out Panthers up close as Shermans laid down suppressive barrages. Forward artillery spotters summoned precise barrages that wrecked sights, snapped treads, and took out visible personnel, even if rounds bounced off plating. Aerial strikes, once skies cleared in late December and January, hammered German tanks bunched on advance routes with ruthless efficiency. The Bulge offensive wrapped with Axis armor in ruins, forfeiting hundreds of vital tanks and seasoned operators without hitting their goals. Come early 1945, the overall war landscape had swung firmly and permanently toward the Allies. U.S. and U.K. troops geared up to ford the Rhine. Red Army columns surged westward, smashing Wehrmacht barriers in huge cold-weather drives. The Reich's factories crumbled beneath relentless air raids, territorial losses hitting key resource zones and production hubs, plus dire lacks in essentials like petroleum and tungsten. Output of Panthers, which hit 3,900 in 1944, plunged in early 1945 as plants took hits, shipping lines faltered, and inputs dried up. Even built Panthers often sat idle due to fuel deficits. In the war's closing phase, German armored groups ditched vehicles not from battle harm, but sheer lack of go juice. Though its triumphs got more fanfare, Hvap's drawbacks warrant a look for full historical accuracy. Its tungsten carbide penetrator shone at punching through plating under ideal hits, but proved fragile by nature. At speeds under roughly 2300 to 2500 FTDS, the insert might fragment on impact instead of boring in. Thus, Hvap's punch dropped off sharply at extended distances where speed waned. It could reliably hit Panther glacis around 1,000 m. Past that, the odds of the core fracturing-shattering upon striking rose considerably in battlefield use. U.S. armored personnel gained insight into these drawbacks via frontline encounters, occasionally with dire consequences. Operators who launched Hvap projectiles at Panthers from distances exceeding optimal reach squandered precious shells, and frequently drew retaliatory barrages from German weapons that retained lethality over far greater spans. Instruction on correct Hvap utilization was typically scant, since the rounds reached combat formations ahead of prepared instructional resources. Numerous operators mastered proficient firing methods via experimentation amid active operations. The recorded account of Sergeant Francis Baker on November 20, 1944, highlighted both the promise and constraints of Hvap during real engagements. His Sherman, fitted with a 76mm cannon and loaded with Hvap ammunition, confronted a Panther roughly 800 YD away. Baker's loader unleashed no fewer than 7 shots, registering several strikes on the enemy's flank plating. To Baker's dismay, the projectiles deflected harmlessly, failing to breach the armor. This clash underscored that Hvap still faced notable shortcomings versus angled plating at side-on approaches. The Panther pulled back from the skirmish instead of pressing onward. Thus, the incident wasn't an outright strategic setback, yet it underscored for Sherman operators that Hvap offered no miraculous fix. Sound maneuvers, precise aiming, accurate distance gauging, and optimal firing positions continued to prove essential. Hvap boosted the prospects for American tank operators markedly, yet triumph demanded expertise and discernment. After-action evaluations of Hvap rounds exposed their triumphs alongside their flaws. Versus the Panther's gun shield at distances reaching 1,000 meters, Hvap proved exceptionally potent upon solid impacts, consistently breaching and frequently sparking devastating follow-on blasts. Versus the glacis panel, outcomes were dismal, save at extremely near distances and ideal orientations. The steep incline caused high-speed tungsten core shots to frequently glance away or fragment upon contact. Consequently, Sherman operators had to position themselves for superior firing lines, outflanking Panthers whenever feasible. The rounds didn't elevate Sherman vehicles to parity with Panthers in engineering terms, but they afforded U.S. operators a viable shot in confrontations where frontal breaches had once seemed unattainable. The Korean War, starting in June 1950, offered fresh validation of Hvap's battlefield utility. U.S. Sherman tanks, mainly the M4A3E8 model with 76mm armaments, clashed against Soviet-designed T-34 Dur-85 vehicles serving North Korean and subsequent Chinese units. Unlike the European theater's acute shortages of Hvap, by 1950, tungsten resources faced no rival wartime pressures, enabling ample reserves. Korean-based American tank operators discovered that Hvap shells readily pierced T-34-85 defenses at standard engagement distances. The T-34-85, though competent, featured shielding markedly weaker than the Panthers. Its 90mm turret facade and 45mm glacis layer proved unable to withstand the tungsten penetrators hurtling from 76mm barrels. In Korea, American Shermans secured impressively lopsided kill rates against adversary tanks, owing in part to refined operator preparation, but crucially to the abundant Hvap supplies. For survivors of European battles, the 76mm Sherman's redemption in Korea carried a poignant edge. The very shells that might have proliferated more in Europe delivered ruinous results in Asia once logistical hurdles eased. Insights from post-war German debriefings and seized records on U.S. HVAP shells showed a mix of reluctant admiration and profound irritation among their experts. Wehrmacht ordnance specialists acknowledged that American factories had overcome challenges in tungsten core shell development more adeptly than their counterparts. Although Germany had originated the core concepts and produced tungsten core variants in the Panzergranate 40 line, output shortfalls ensured these never reached adequate volumes. U.S. HVAP manufacturing, hampered too by tungsten shortages, nonetheless outpaced German efforts by a wide margin come late 1944. Captured German tank operators, in later interviews, often cited advancements in American munitions as a key element that muddled their operational dynamics. Awareness that Shermans could drill through Panther shields at typical ranges compelled German operators to abandon sole dependence on forward armor for safety. This prompted more guarded approaches, deliberate pacing in offensives, and heavier emphasis on fortified stances. Yet, such reactive strategies handed the momentum to U.S. units, permitting integrated infantry armor assaults that offset German strengths. The morale strain of armor losses to newfound weaknesses fostered the ever more guarded outlook that defined late-war German tank maneuvers. In 1945, examinations of HVAP rounds retrieved from damaged German tanks gave their engineers a thorough grasp of U.S. projectile engineering. The setup featured a tungsten carbide penetrator encased in light aluminum segments, which cleverly utilized limited critical resources to boost armor-piercing effectiveness while cutting down on tungsten needed per shot. The slim outer shell enabled greater speeds minus undue strain on gun barrels, and the heavy tungsten center held onto impact force over ranges much longer than typical steel alternatives. Though German specialists appreciated these benefits, they simply didn't have the manufacturing muscle or raw supplies to create comparable innovations. Toward the end of 1944, efforts in German armored vehicle and shell manufacturing zeroed in on sustaining current models instead of innovating fresh variants. The Panther's KWK 42-75mm cannon already delivered strong anti-tank performance using routine rounds against enemy armor. Thus, crafting enhanced German projectiles wasn't the top urgent need. Such work would demand tungsten that Germany couldn't afford to divert, plus factory adjustments that overwhelmed facilities battered by bombings. In the war's closing phase, German tanks relied on shell types from 1942 and 1943. Meanwhile, U.S. munitions kept advancing, yet the Battle of Aricourt's lasting importance reached well past its on-the-ground effects. That clash demonstrated beyond doubt that U.S. armored strategy, stressing speed, integrated force teamwork, top-notch supply chains, and massive resource backing, could reliably overcome German approaches that depended mostly on standout single-vehicle prowess. For 1944 Panzer brigades, German leaders had built their plans on the Panther's engineering strengths, figuring that heavy plating and raw firepower would offset raw operators and thin reinforcements. That idea turned out disastrously wrong. Observers from both armies drew the obvious conclusion: weaponry ingenuity counted and offered real edges, but mastery in joint operations, logistics superiority, and enhanced crew preparation weighed heavier for winning fights and campaigns. Beyond the engineering breakdown, HVAP's effects on tank operators warrant deeper thought. For U.S. crews who had battled Panthers using basic shells amid the grueling Normandy campaign, HVAP's introduction brought concrete optimism. It didn't erase the danger from Panthers entirely, yet it supplied a means for solid odds of breaching armor in good conditions. This morale lift spurred better execution and bolder maneuvers. On the German side, realizing that American vehicles now mounted a real head-on menace shifted their battlefield math entirely. Otto Carius, a famed German tank veteran who led Tigers and made it through the conflict, detailed in his after-war accounts the mental toll of confronting foes able to punch through his protection. The feeling of being untouchable from robust armor had been key to maintaining team spirit and daring moves. Once that faded, unit effectiveness dropped noticeably. Panther operators up against HVAP-armed Shermans felt that confidence crumble. The turret shield turned into a pinpoint weakness that skilled U.S. teams could target. Armed with this, Panther drivers grew markedly more hesitant, delayed in firing, and overall reluctant to gamble in combat. On a grander scale, HVAP's creation raises larger issues about tech rivalries in contemporary conflicts and the vital role of production scale. Engineers in both the U.S. and Germany were skilled, with deep insights into projectile dynamics and armor defeat. Early on, each side spotted the potential of tungsten core shells and crafted workable prototypes. The key gap boiled down to output capability and supply access, not expertise. American factories churned out Hvap in volumes that could sway fights, even if not for saturating every outfit. German ones struggled just to run trials. This trend echoed in many armaments during the war. Germany devised intricate, frequently advanced gear, but couldn't manufacture enough to sway the big picture. U.S. output generated simpler yet potent tools in vast quantities. The M4 Sherman wasn't the war's premier tank by raw specs, but U.S. plants built roughly 49,324 units versus about 6,132 Panthers. That 8-1 manufacturing edge, paired with upgrades like Hvap that narrowed the engineering divide, ultimately delivered strategic dominance. Decisively influential. The professional trajectories of soldiers who battled at Aracourt after the war demonstrate the lasting effects of those battlefield encounters on strategic military perspectives. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, who led the 37th Tank Battalion through Aracourt with notable success, advanced to serve as Chief of Staff for the United States Army and lent his name to the M1 Abrams primary battle tank. Insights Abrams gained regarding integrated arms operations, the vital role of personnel preparation, and the essential supply of sufficient munitions shaped his professional path and the principles he contributed to shaping. The M1 Abrams was intentionally crafted featuring a robust 120mm smoothbore cannon and advanced munition variants, such as depleted uranium projectiles that perform essentially the identical function as HVAP did during World War II. Survivors from German Panther formations who endured the conflict and subsequently integrated into the West German Bundeswehr carried forward distinct yet profoundly significant teachings. They had directly encountered the drawbacks of holding technical edges without the manufacturing capacity and supply chains to sustain them. During the Cold War, Bundeswehr armored strategies prioritized excellence in preparation, openly acknowledging that West Germany lacked the ability to rival Soviet forces in sheer numbers. However, planners within the Bundeswehr, drawing from wartime knowledge, also stressed the potency of munitions. The Leopard 1 and subsequent Leopard 2 primary battle tanks incorporated intricate munition architectures, guided by the understanding that projectile advancements and operator expertise were as crucial as defensive plating thickness. Europe's World War II finale, signaled by Germany's full capitulation on May 8, 1945, eliminated the urgent demand for HVAP rounds targeted at Panthers. U.S. ordnance specialists meticulously inspecting wrecked machinery uncovered unmistakable signs of HVAP impacts on certain remnants, verifying the round's efficacy in optimal scenarios while highlighting its constraints. Panthers struck by HVAP generally displayed breaches via the gun shield or turret front at advantageous impacts, though seldom via the frontal hull, which proved exceptionally durable. This trend corroborated U.S. combat strategies that focused on side assaults and generating optimal firing positions. Extensive after-action reviews determined that although HVAP substantially enhanced Sherman effectiveness versus formidable German defenses, the paramount elements were superior troop numbers, far superior supply networks, total command of the skies, unmatched field guns, and more adept command frameworks. The evolution of U.S. tank operators from mid-1944 to early 1945 embodied the combined influence of frontline lessons, enhanced gear access, and acclimation to niche rounds like HVAP. Operators arriving in Normandy during June 1944 frequently harbored real fears of confronting German vehicles, especially Panthers and Tigers. By the start of 1945, following prolonged engagements, notable skill enhancements, greater access to 76mm equipped Shermans, and increasing comfort with HVAP rounds, American tank operators entered battles with much greater assurance. This mindset change yielded tangible combat outcomes. Assured operators engaged more boldly, embraced strategic gambles amid openings, and capitalized on battlefield edges. Though HVAP rounds by themselves did not drive this evolution, their presence and demonstrated reliability played a substantial role in bolstering U.S. armored unit spirit and battlefield execution. The heritage of HVAP innovation persists in shaping contemporary munition engineering. From 1945 forward, U.S. armored principles steadfastly highlighted munition potency as a key aspect of vehicle architecture. Today's tank rounds employ depleted uranium or tungsten composite projectiles, selected for virtually identical density and rigidity traits that rendered tungsten carbide viable in World War II. The core concept endures. Focus the utmost kinetic force within a compact, ultra-dense shot propelled at the utmost feasible speed. The progression from 1944's Hvap to current armor-defeating, fin-stabilized, discarding Sabot rounds exemplifies how core World War II teachings directly guide ongoing military advancements. Soviet and subsequent Russian tank munition progress traced strikingly parallel routes, separately concluding that penetration power relies substantially on shot material attributes and energy transfer. The worldwide tank munition sector traces its technical origins to the HVAP era, when specialists first proved irrefutably that tailored rounds could offset defensive armor benefits to some extent. On September 19, 1944, when Latourne Merwin H. Hankins' Sherman teams initially confronted Panthers using HVAP rounds at Aracourt, it signified a true pivot in the mental equilibrium of tank combat. German operators Germans who had previously battled with assurance, shielded by their heavy plating, came to realize that U.S. tanks represented a substantial danger from straight ahead. Operators of American vehicles, once sensing they were overpowered, built substantial assurance upon discovering they carried shells capable of breaching Panthers in optimal conditions. The change in battlefield mindset, sparked by tungsten core rounds manufactured in U.S. plants, shaped all following tank clashes in the European theater. HVAP shells, despite shortages that kept them from reaching needed levels, delivered sufficient upgrades to convert U.S. tank teams from hesitant guardians into assured aggressors, prepared to challenge German plating up front. The tankers who unleashed those initial HVAP projectiles amid fighting, seeing the tungsten penetrators slice through plating once deemed impenetrable, proved how manufacturing might and materials expertise, when smartly targeted at critical combat challenges, can conquer what appear as vast technological gaps. This core insight, forged through steep sacrifices on fronts throughout Europe, carries straightforward applicability for strategists tackling the tech hurdles of contemporary conflicts.